My name's Chris Molinar, and in this video today, I'm going to help you master the process of pre-qualifying a buyer and a seller. So stick around right to the end so we can dig into both perspectives of the real estate deal. There's a list of questions that you need to ask, and I'm going to go through them with you step by step. The first question you might ask is, what neighborhood do you want to live in, and what type of commute would you like for your work, etc. And what's important to you about that neighborhood? In a perfect world, how soon would you like to be moved and settled into the new place? Have you seen anything that you like so far? Have you been in to see any other houses so far yet? This is a very important question because it's going to help you determine whether or not they have been working with another real estate agent at all yet so far. And if there is a specific particular property that they've mentioned that they've either seen in person or online, that is a really great conversation to dig further into with them, because it will help you determine what did they like about that property, what did they not like, and it's your opportunity to present to them what's good about that property, what's not good about that property, if you've been in to see that property yourself, or how many days it's been on the market, whether you think it's priced well, there's anything you know about its location that's good or not so good. It's a really good opportunity to present your value, experience, and your credibility during that part of the conversation. What type and style of home do you currently live in, if you don't mind me asking? And how soon would you like to be moved in and settled into the next place? The reason why it's really important to understand where they live currently is because if they live, even if they're renting in a brand new build, it might be a little bit more difficult for them to settle into a very old home. Now, dig a little bit deeper to find out what their comfort zone is in the type and style of home, but I always use that as a reference point. And similarly, you'll ask, where are you moving from? Because depending on how you've connected with this buyer, they may or may not be in your local market. One of the next key questions is, do you need to sell a home in order to buy the next one? Which is quite obvious, but while you are asking these questions, that question itself might lead you right into the next part of what we're talking about today, which is pre-qualifying a seller. But it's important to know. And if they are renting, do they currently have a lease, and or when is the lease up for renewal? Very important, because if you go out shopping and they get a property under contract and you find out they still have 5 months left on their lease and it kiboshes the whole deal, it would have been better to know that in the beginning. Now, do you have a mortgage person that you're working with, or are you going to be paying cash? And people are always flattered when you ask them if they're going to be paying cash. And if so, have you determined what sort of price range that you'd like to purchase in? Do you have a sort of a budget in mind? I don't ask what people are pre-qualified for at the bank, because that doesn't always tell me what price range they are most comfortable with. So I always ask that first. And again, if they tell you that there's a couple of properties online that they did like, that will give you some sort of an idea of what price range that they're comfortable purchasing as well. Don't always listen to what they say, listen to what they do. Because they might say, oh, I really want to buy a bungalow, but then they say, here's a property that I really like, and it's a 4-level split or a 2-story. So always pay attention to the properties that they choose and use that as a really good benchmark for what the next property might look like. Then you ask questions like, how many bedrooms and bathrooms would you like in the next house? Or what sort of features are you looking for in a home? How many square feet? You know, back to the idea of where they currently live, how much space do they have? If they have a family and they say it's too cramped, then you know that they need something that's a little bit bigger, and knowing what they currently live in helps you determine that. If you know that they have kids, or if you know that they have pets, you might ask a question like, is yard really important to you? Because then that might help you eliminate townhouses, condos, or new builds, which kind of leads into the next question. How old is too old? Would you consider a new build? And if you would consider a new build and it doesn't have a driveway, and it doesn't have a deck, and it doesn't have a fence, and it doesn't have a yard, do you have the financial means to get that in place? And if not, then let's write off that option altogether. Now, Similar to that, are you okay with a property that needs some renovations? And if so, what's your budget to tackle renovations? What's your wherewithal? What's your lifestyle? Can you take it on? And if so, there's a difference between I can do flooring and paint, or I'm okay taking on a significantly large renovation project. Depending on your skill set depending on your comfort zone and depending on your current lifestyle, because it's a little bit tougher when you're moving in with kids, or of course as well, your financial situation. If you can buy it, renovate it, then sell your house, then move in, there's a little bit more of an involved conversation around that. But right now you're just digging for information. A really important question to ask is there anybody that you want to bring with you to view properties when you're going out shopping? And especially for first-time home buyers, because if there's going to be a backseat driver that shows up at the home inspection, whether it's the uncle or the mom or the dad or the grandparents, I would prefer to have them out for the first 3 to 4 showings if they're going to show up anyways, because you are going to get the perspective from their trusted family member or friend at those showings, so then you can then apply that to your process with shopping there forward, rather than spending all of your time finding a property that then later you find out the family member doesn't approve of it. For example, if you're shopping for 1950s properties, you get the home inspection together and you find out that their parents want them to buy a newer property, and the parents are willing to help them put a yard and a fence and a deck and a driveway, as an example. Then you might just say, what other thoughts do you have about the entire process? And then I like my conversation to go in this direction. Let's pretend, now paint a picture. Let's pretend that we found the perfect home for you today. It would take 2 weeks to remove conditions. Then it would be typically 30 to 45 days until possession date, unless it's a vacant property. And so based on the timeline that you're thinking about, even if we went out shopping today, even if we found the perfect property, you're not going to be moved in until this time. And sometimes people don't recognize or realize that, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes off for them and says, gee, if I want to be moved in by 2 to 3 months, then really, even if I found the property today, the timeline would only still work out in such of a way. And also, when you paint the picture for them, you're mentally getting the ball rolling for them, you're preparing them, and you're also delivering your expertise. You're also letting them know what to expect, which creates a lot of comfort for the buyer when you're having this conversation. And depending what their timeline is, you can then suggest for next steps, depending on where they're at with the process. When you're pre-qualifying a seller, it's a slightly different process, but again, you're really just digging for information. So here, let's pretend that we've already booked an appointment with a seller to talk about selling their home. The question I will first ask is, hey, name, let's say the name is Bob. When we meet up tomorrow at 5, are you in a position to get the ball rolling with things, or is this really just a preliminary meeting? Because you don't know if they just want to have a market evaluation done on their property and they might not sell for 6 months, right? Or they might just want your opinion on a market evaluation for banking purposes or whatever it might be, or even they want to buy a property from their uncle, or they want to sell this property to their kids. It really doesn't matter. You want to be the good realtor, but you need to know ahead of time what their situation is. And when you say, or is this just a preliminary meeting, you're letting them off the hook. But you also want to know if they are ready to get the ball rolling, you need to be prepared. Next question I ask is, have you had a market evaluation done on the property at all recently? This question also helps you determine whether or not they have talked to agents at all in the past recently, which you probably do want to know if you're going to be competing for this listing. And then you say, let me check, where are you guys moving to again? And if they talk about where they're moving to and you didn't know that they were thinking about purchasing next, that's where you can kind of mix the buyer conversation with the seller conversation. And as much as people want to sell their house, remember, if they're looking to sell and then purchase, getting into the next scenario for them is the ideal place. So that's their motivation. That's the goal of what they want to accomplish. So sometimes you're better off to focus on that, knowing that selling the house is just a requirement for them to getting where they want to go. And again, in a perfect world, how soon would you like to be settled into your new place? Do you have an idea of what you'd like to see out of this property? Or do you have an idea of what you think we can list the house for? Now, I know some agents like to come forth with their price before they ask the seller these types of questions, but I always like to get a benchmark. If the seller gives you a little bit of a pushback and says, I want to know what you think for price first, then you might pivot the conversation a little bit to say, hey, I just pulled up the MLS history and I see that you bought it 5 years ago. and that you rent it for this price. Is that correct? Something along those lines. Or you might say, I can see that the tax assessment is here. I know that the tax assessment isn't accurate portrayal of value. And then they might use that as a reference point to say, yeah, but the tax assessments are always too high. Yeah, but the tax assessments are always too low. And it just gives you a benchmark of where their head's at. I just want to know what their expectations are so that I can be soft in my approach, so that they're not startled if my price doesn't match theirs. At least I mentally know where they stand. Next question. Do you still have a mortgage on the property, or is it free and clear? And if they do have a mortgage, you say, do you know what the current balance is on the mortgage? And do you also know whether or not there is a payout penalty? Because again, if they're looking to get the ball rolling when you meet up with them tomorrow or the day after, and you ask them this question about payout penalty, and they totally forgot about that, now they're going to make that phone call to their bank to find out what the payout penalty is, so that when you meet up, they know that and they're more in a position to make a decision. And as well, you might get their mind working now towards what's your current interest rate, and are you able to, or could you potentially consider porting the mortgage? And if they are buying, it starts to blend into that conversation of pre-qualifying them on the purchase side as well. If they've been to a mortgage broker, what type of price range they're looking at. And again, like I'd mentioned before, when you're asking them about selling their property and you know they're purchasing, and you start to set the stage for what it's all going to look like together, you're painting the picture for them and you're creating a lot of comfort to them because you're displaying your confidence and your experience in the entire process. Then you just ask them, tell me about your house. This is important because it will help you determine their personality style and what's important to them when it comes to selling their property. And you can speak to those features. If they are proud of certain parts of their home, you can use that as a value add. And if they're selling their property to you, then those are probably also the reasons why they bought it, which also might be highlights you didn't think of at first that could also be a great selling point that you can then communicate to the next potential buyer. And you can include that in your presentation when you're talking to the seller in terms of your ability to find a person just like them to buy their property. And then if there isn't any MLS history on the property, I will ask them how long they owned it for, maybe what they picked it up for at that time. And then you ask, have you done any upgrades to the property since you purchased it? And then you might ask, how would you determine the condition of the property on a scale of 1 to 10? And then you tell them ahead of time that I have a pretty good gut feel, ballpark, for what we should be able to price the property for, and we'll be able to get into the details when we meet up in person. Because some people might say, what do you think it's worth? Let's make that the first thing we talk about when we meet up tomorrow at 5. What's your commission? Let's make that the first thing we talk about tomorrow when we meet up at 5 o'clock. Don't get into a sales presentation over the phone. And then, is there anything specific that I need to know about the property before I get together with you that might affect price? And then they might disclose to you something that you do need to know. Then they might disclose to you something that they really want you to know that is a benefit. And next, what's most important, especially if this person was referred to me or if they don't know me very well, I make sure to tell them, I'm going to send you a link to my Google profile or my social media accounts or my website so that you can get a really good idea of what I'm all about before we meet in person. Because I am active on social media, and because I have Google reviews, and because I put out a lot of video content, this is a really good opportunity for the potential buyer or seller to spend some time getting to know me on video before we meet up, because it improves my chances. A lot of other agents might not be active on social media and also might not be doing video. And then when they get to see me in person, they already know what to expect from me and my personality and my communication style and what I do to sell a house. So it makes the process that much easier. And then I simply ask, did you have any other questions before we meet? All right, great. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 5. Thanks for being here today. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you on this video next.